If you're like me, you've read a lot of regression or reincarnation stories, and you probably remember when they first hooked you. That moment where the main character gets a second chance, where knowledge of the future finally means they won't be powerless again. And for a while, that fantasy really works. Watching somebody restart their life and do everything right is satisfying. Seeing plans come together, systems broken, talents finally flourishing. But somewhere along the way, after reading enough of these stories, I realized something kind of strange. I stopped caring how strong the main character was. Not because the fights got worse, not because the world building fell apart, but because the struggles started to feel fake. Most of these stories weren't really about growth anymore. They were about efficiency, about skipping steps, about turning effort into a mere formality. And it was while bouncing between stories like that, chasing something that still felt fresh, that I ended up discovering Eternally Regressing Night. This really opened up my eyes, not because it had a better system, or the main character was more talented, but because it did something most stories don't. It made hard work matter. And once I started thinking about why that felt so rare, a pattern started to emerge. In a lot of regression and power fantasy stories, success isn't all about effort at all. It's about optimization. And once a story becomes about optimization, tension starts to erode. Not because the world suddenly becomes harmless or because nothing bad can happen anymore, but because the outcome started to feel predetermined. The hero isn't navigating uncertainty, they're following a route that they already understand. Their choices stop feeling reactive and start feeling procedural, like they're moving through a checklist rather than a living world. In most regression stories, that future knowledge reshapes everything. The character knows which risks are worth taking, and which paths inevitably lead to power. And because of that, the tension doesn't come from discovery anymore. It fades quietly, because we're no longer learning the world alongside the hero. We're watching them execute a plan, and we already know it's going to work. This isn't limited to just regression stories either. You can see that same pattern play out in a lot of power fantasy narratives, even ones that don't involve restarting life at all. Take Solo Leveling, for example. Not because it's a regression story, but because it shows where this approach often leads. Jinwoo doesn't go back in time. He doesn't correct his past mistakes. Instead, he experiences an extreme acceleration of power that very quickly separates him from the world around him. At first, that gap's exciting. Watching someone climb from the bottom and surpass expectations is awesome. But as that acceleration continues, something subtle happens. The world stops pushing back in meaningful ways. His allies lose relevance. Previously terrifying enemies become benchmarks rather than threats. Conflicts that once required planning or sacrifice start resolving themselves through sheer force. The central question of the story quietly shifts. It's no longer, can he survive this, or what will it cost him? It becomes, how impressive will this look, or what power unlocks this time? And while that kind of escalation can be thrilling, it changes the emotional texture of the story. Where power grows faster than resistance, effort starts to feel ornamental. The struggle exists to justify the outcome, not challenge it. The result isn't a bad story, not even at all. It's just a lighter one. Because tension doesn't come from strength alone, it comes from friction. And when the world can no longer meaningfully resist the protagonist, that friction slowly disappears. This is where a lot of regression and power fantasy stories start leaning heavily on the game systems. Stats, skills, quests, notifications, clear, constant feedback telling both character and the audience that progress is happening. And on paper, that system makes sense. They're efficient, they're familiar, they give structure to growth in worlds that might otherwise feel overwhelming. But the problem is that many stories don't use systems as a framework. They use them as a substitute for storytelling. Instead of showing us growth through choices, consequences, and adaptation, the system simply announces it. Numbers go up, new abilities unlock, difficulty scales. The character doesn't have to wonder if they're improving. The uncertainty is gone, replaced by reassurance. Over time, that reassurance becomes a crutch. When every obstacle is filtered through menus and metrics, struggles start to feel abstract. We're no longer watching someone test their limits, we're watching them manage a build. The tension shifts away from what will happen and towards what unlocks next. And while that can be fun in short bursts, it slowly drains weight from the story. Because real tension isn't just about danger, it's about not knowing if effort will be enough. Systems, when overused, remove that doubt. They promise progress before it's earned. And that's often where these stories start to feel hollow. And I think that's why so many of these stories blur together over time. When growth is guaranteed, effort stops feeling personal. When success is inevitable, struggle loses its identity. The story still moves forward, but it no longer feels like it belongs to anyone in particular. It could happen to anyone. because it isn't asking much of the character at all. Eternally Regressing Knight breaks this pattern in a quiet way. The regression isn't the reward, it's a burden. The main character, Encrid, keeps his memories. He keeps his pain, he keeps the failures. There's no system reassuring him that he's improving, no stat screens confirming progress. Knowledge doesn't give him control, it just gives him another chance to endure. To understand why Eternally Regressing Knight's approach to hard work feels so different, it helps to be clear about who the protagonist, Encrid, actually is and how his world operates. Encrid's not a chosen hero, and he's not someone blessed with hidden talent waiting to awaken. At the start of the story, he's defined almost entirely by his inadequacy. He wants to become a knight, not because destiny demands it, but because it represents a standard he believes is worth striving for. That dream doesn't come with shortcuts, but it does come with some repeated failures. Regression in Eternally Regressing Knight, it's not a game system or a reward. When Encrid dies, he awakens with his memories still intact. What he gains isn't power, but awareness. He remembers what didn't work, where he failed, how close he came to winning. There are no menus, no levels, no guarantees that trying again will go any better. What really defines Eternally Regressing Knight isn't what it gives Encrid, but what it deliberately withholds. There's no external voice confirming progress, no stat screen telling Encrid that his suffering is translating into strength. Improvement exists only if he can perceive it himself, through discipline, repetition, and careful attention to his own limits. This creates a feedback loop that's fundamentally different from most power fantasy stories. Failure isn't erased by regression, and it isn't reframed as spectacle. It becomes part of Encrid's internal library of experience. Every attempt adds context, every loss sharpens understanding. Growth happens slowly and often invisibly, until it doesn't. That is the foundation that Eternally Regressing Knight builds on. Not a system that rewards effort automatically, but a structure that forces effort to justify itself through consistency. This is where Eternally Regressing Knight becomes truly rare. In most power fantasy stories, hard work is cosmetic. Characters train, but success is already guaranteed by talent, by bloodlines, or some broken system. In Eternally Regressing Knight, hard work is the system. Encrid's not special. He's not the chosen one. He doesn't have a secret hidden class. He survives because he refuses to stop. He repeats the same drills, fails the same encounters, refines technique through repetition, not genius. Regression doesn't make him talented. It just gives him more chances to work hard. Progress is slow, it's messy, it's incomplete. And because of that, it feels real. Hard work doesn't decorate success, it creates it. Hard work is one of the most commonly claimed virtues in power fantasy stories. Almost every protagonist trains. Almost every narrative insists that effort matters. And on the surface, many of these stories seem to be saying the right things. They tell us that persistence is important, that discipline is admirable, that strength must be earned. But in practice, most of these stories treat hard work as a transaction. The protagonist works hard so they can eventually stop working hard. Training is something to be endured until talent, destiny, or a system finally take over. Effort becomes a temporary inconvenience on the way to a more comfortable form of power. And once that power is achieved, the work fades into the background. Its job's done. Eternally Regressing Knight rejects that idea almost entirely. For Encrid, hard work isn't a means to an end. It's not a phase. It's not something he resents. It's a lens through which he understands himself and the world around him. Training isn't something he survives until he becomes strong enough to move past it. It's something he actively enjoys, because it gives shape and meaning to his existence. Failure in Eternally Regressing Knight, it's not a punishment or a setback that needs to be erased. It's information. Every loss teaches Encrid something concrete, something usable, something that can be applied the next time he wakes up and tries again. Regression doesn't cheapen the process, it deepens it. Because Encrid remembers his failures, they don't disappear. They accumulate, forming a growing body of experience rather than a list of mistakes to be avoided. This is where eternally regressing Knight's depiction of perseverance becomes so distinct. Encrid doesn't train because he believes success is guaranteed. He trains because the act of training itself brings him closer to his goal of becoming a knight. The work isn't framed as suffering that must be justified by future rewards. It's framed as purpose. Each repetition, each correction, each refinement of technique reinforces his identity, rather than eroding it. In other words, hard work in eternally regressing Knight is motivating. It's not instrumental. That distinction matters more than it might initially seem. When effort's instrumental, its value depends entirely on outcome. If success arrives, the work was worth it. If it doesn't, the effort feels wasted. Eternally regressing Knight refuses that logic. Encrid's efforts matter regardless of outcome, because it shapes who he's becoming. Progress is meaningful, not because it guarantees a victory, but because it represents alignment between his actions and his aspirations. This also reframes talent in a subtle but important way. Eternally regressing Knight doesn't ask Encrid to overcome talent. It also doesn't pretend talent doesn't exist. His whole squad is filled with talented individuals. Instead, it shows what it looks like to pursue mastery without relying on talent. Encrid isn't secretly gifted. He isn't waiting for some latent potential to awaken. He improves because he pays attention, because he reflects on his failures honestly, and because he's willing to repeat the process without losing heart. That willingness isn't portrayed as grim endurance. It's portrayed as conviction. Eternally regressing Knight, it's not a story about becoming overwhelmingly strong. It's a story about maintaining direction, about continuing to choose discipline even when it's difficult. It's about finding satisfaction not in dominance, but in improvement. Encrid doesn't chase moments of triumph, he chases consistency. And that's why the depiction of hard work here feels real. Not because the story tells us it matters, but because it shows us a character who truly believes in it, who derives meaning from it, and who uses failure not as a source of despair, but as a guidepost. And over time, that way of approaching effort starts to change how progress itself is measured. One of the reasons hard work feels so different in Eternally Regressing Knight isn't that it's treated as something that spikes. It compounds. Most power fantasy stories frame growth as explosive. A breakthrough that happens, a limit's shattered, and suddenly the character is operating on a totally different level. Talent reveals itself in moments like that. It arrives all at once. It's undeniable. Hard work doesn't look like that, though. Hard work accumulates quietly. Each repetition adds something small. Each failure corrects something subtle. Each adjustment makes the next attempt slightly more efficient than the last one. On its own, none of these changes really feel impressive, but over time, they stack. Eternally Regressing Knight understands this in a way that most stories don't. Regression resets Encrid's circumstances, but it doesn't reset his internal progress. His technique improves, his judgment sharpens. His sense of timing becomes more precise. There aren't things that you can point to on a stat screen, but they're the kind of improvements that only show themselves after long stretches of repetition. That's why Encrid growth often feels invisible, until suddenly it isn't. When talent-driven stories show progress, they do it by escalating spectacles. Bigger enemies, bigger attacks, bigger reactions. Eternally Regressing Knight shows progress through consistency. The same motion executed more cleanly. The same encounter handled with fewer mistakes. This kind of growth doesn't create instant dominance, but it does something more interesting. It creates reliability. Over time, compounding effort closes the gap that talent opens early on. Talent might decide who advances quickly at the start, but it's sustained effort that determines who keeps improving once the easy gains are gone. Eternally Regressing Knight leans into that reality. Encrid doesn't catch up by surpassing others in a single moment. He catches up by never resetting to zero. That's why his victories feel earned in a way that's hard to fake. They don't come from sudden leaps in power. They come from momentum built slowly, almost invisibly, over countless repetitions. Hard work in Eternally Regressing Knight isn't impressive because it's intense. It's impressive because it compounds. In Eternally Regressing Knight, Perseverance isn't framed as heroic suffering or motivational spectacle. It's framed as a quiet, deliberate commitment to growth. That's why the work resonates. Not because it's harder than in other stories, but because it's honest about what effort actually looks like when it's chosen willingly, repeated patiently, and pursued for its own sake. At some point, I stopped caring how strong the main character was, and Eternally Regressing Night reminded me why. It isn't a story about doing everything right the second time. It's a story about what it costs to keep going when talent runs out, when the system can't save you, and when perseverance is the only thing you have left. Most regression stories are about winning faster. Eternally Regressing Night is about enduring longer. And yeah, if you made it this far, thanks for listening. This is actually the first time I've used my own voice for something like this. I didn't really know how it'd land, but I wanted to start a YouTube video that had some actual substance, you know? Anyway, if you enjoyed it, I appreciate you sticking around. And if you didn't enjoy it, well, you're still here, so I'll take that as a win. Either way, thanks for giving your time. See you in the next one.